We've all been there. You meet someone new, or someone you kind of know. You start with the usual, hi, hello, followed by go-to questions like, what do you do? Which team do you work in? And after a bit of back and forth, awkward silence. I've been here many times, not just at work, but in a variety of different social settings, like meeting a far cousin at a wedding who I haven't seen in years, or speaking to a random stranger at a bar. But what if you could speak to anyone and never run out of things to say? The problem is, we all have some level of social anxiety, which plays a role in our awkwardness, but we're all at different levels, and I personally graduated to the more advanced levels without any cheat codes. So over time, I developed my own 3 methods to speak to anyone and never be awkward again. Well, at least most of the time. Initially, I blamed myself for being too shy, not confident, and just a little bit socially inept. But like everyone else, I was the exact opposite around people I was comfortable with. So I asked myself, what's really going on? How can one person have such opposite personalities? What I realized was, even though I'm an introvert, I don't have 2 personalities. And it wasn't even a confidence problem. It was a skill problem. I simply hadn't mastered the art of small talk. And just like any other art form, like learning a new instrument or writing poetry, speaking to people is a skill which can be developed with enough practice. So through years of trial and error, and by observing people better than me, I quickly understood there are only 3 things you need to do to speak to anyone fluently and never run out of things to say. And the best part is, you can start using these 3 things almost immediately. What would you do if someone said the following? I went golfing over the weekend. You can either say, oh, that's interesting, and then stare into space while listening to the sound of silence. Or you can ask intentional follow-up questions. For example, where do you usually play? How long have you been playing golf for? This naturally leads to more questions like, do you play competitively? Are you part of a club? Now, you probably couldn't care less about golf, but firstly, this shows you're genuinely interested in what the other person has to say, or at least, that's the perception you're creating. Secondly, it removes any awkward pauses and silences, and it gives you the power to steer the conversation in any direction. Because when you really think about it, a conversation is just a series of questions and answers, and the person who asks the most questions is usually the one in control. But for this to work, you have to ask the right questions, and this is where the second method comes in. Now, the common misconception is, to become better at speaking, you need to speak more. But like great paradoxes in life, to improve your communication, you need to do the exact opposite and actually listen more. That means actively listen. Do nothing else but listen, because it's easy for your mind to wander and start preparing your response rather than actually hearing what's been said, which can lead to saying something completely irrelevant and off topic, adding another awkward moment to the collection. But if you listen intently, you can ask the right questions and create a free-flowing, more interesting conversation for everyone involved. As the famous quote goes, most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Don't be that person. There are enough of those already. The cherry on the cake is when you find common ground. We instantly click with people who share similar backgrounds or interests. Sometimes this is really obvious, like you both like golf. Other times, not so much. But even then, with enough probing and asking the right questions, there's always something you both have in common. And once you find that thing, move the conversation in that direction. Let it flow. The truth is, there will be times where the conversation goes nowhere. And yes, there will be awkward silences. If that happens, just learn to be comfortable with the silence, because at the end of the day, it's just silence, and it will eventually pass. But by following these 3 methods, more often than not, you'll be able to speak to anyone and never run out of things to say.